Good morning to you and welcome to the Tales of the TTea Live, powered by Podium Vodka, the spirit of motorsport. So today would have been senior race day, and what better way to start it off than with the great Roy Moore and his mountain memories. Good morning, Roy.
Yes, and good morning, everybody from the Isle of Man. And like before, I don't know whether you can hear those sounds in the background. That would have been senior race day many years ago with the Manx Nortons and the MVs and the Gilleras on a public holiday in the Isle of Man. So everybody would have been out sitting on a hedge somewhere and getting sorted. Just listen to that in the background.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that's it.
So remember, everyone, it is an interactive show, so feel free to fire your questions this way. Roy, we could hear that a little bit louder if you want to turn it up.
I was just going to say that. Yeah, just getting that sorted out there. My technical aspects are not very good.
Get the kettle on, get yourself a cup of tea. It is TT with Roy, and come and listen to his great mountain memories. Cheers, Roy.
Cheers.
So, what time would you have been going up to your to Ramsey Hairpin? What time would you have been going to get yourself set up on senior race day, Roy?
Well, we're on an hour beforehand, just to go through the technical aspect, because that's critical, isn't it? I mean, you're relying on computer technology, so they just like to test the gear out, just have a quick run round the course to make sure everything's okay. We're not kind of too involved in that, unless there's a delay. If it's half an hour delay, they'll keep on air. And maybe that's an opportunity to go around and maybe get a few stories. But in all honesty, it's been an absolute delight to reflect on certain things in this medium, because normally you don't get the time when you're on the radio. You make lots of notes to pop in when the racing's on and maybe relevant and what have you. But certainly you don't get the opportunity to get that sorted. So yeah, it's good. So about an hour before, Tim Glover will introduce the action from the grandstand, and certainly then he'll do a trip round Glen Helen, what the conditions are like. Dave Christian is good because he lives in Ramsey. So he always comes from the Ramsey to Glen Helen on the TT mountain course. So he's got an indication of what the conditions are like. Not that the riders would listen to that. They'll listen to the official announcement about it. But the Travel and Marshal would have been out, a couple. And what a lovely program that was the other night about the Travel and Marshals. I thoroughly enjoyed that. It was just an insight that I never talked to Jim Hunter for more than 5 minutes, probably at a time. And disappointment that Paul didn't have the connections to get back with technical issues. But yeah, they would be giving them indication. And it would be when you're in the commentary position at Ramsey, you'd be looking out through the commentary box window and you'd see a marshal come up very slowly and just go round Ramsey. And it's always on conditions like today. I mean, it's actually starting to rain now. So under the trees from Ramsey Hairpin to the waterworks, inevitably, if there's been rain, the clerk of the course will always say damp patches exiting Ramsey Hairpin. But then up on the mountain is critical as well. And they're in permanent contact with as Jim was mentioning, and the other night, and certainly they're in permanent contact, and they get an indication of what the situation is. When Tim has done his trip round, well, then there's a few other things maybe that have got to be done. But then probably, and isn't it wonderful? I mean, where else in the world would you get a situation where within about 10 minutes before starting out to be doing 190, 200 miles an hour and lapping at 131, 135 area, that you would get Chris Kinley going round with a microphone asking how the riders are feeling. And to be fair, one or two will shy away, one or two will keep out of his way deliberately. But the majority, to be fair, and the same with the television, and they're getting hit with the same questions all the time. You know, what response do you get when you say to somebody who's basically putting their life on the line? To be fair, Tim Reeves recounted that very, very vividly in I think the Sidecar DVD, which is out, saying, there's people around about you, and you're going out there. But Chris just barges in and gets all the light right up to about a minute before they're off all the action and all the updates and everything that's connected. If you had trouble the night before, the last practice might have been disappointing and they've had to work on the bike, put new bits on it. And that doesn't continue there. Even on the line, there's drama. Some fabulous stories. Dave Molyneux was on the line and the control in the front of the sidecar was faulty and he had to fit a new piece. Then all of a sudden, the clerk of the course announced there will be a half-hour delay. Why? A dog had been seen wandering around Glenlock campsite, and they were worried that there's a possibility it might have gone to the other side of the course and it might come back. So until that dog was located, it gave Dave another half hour, and I don't know whether he went on to win or not. The famous Barney the dog in Kirkmichael, that was another delayed start, and we've actually met the man who owned Barney. We were down at Union Mills doing our Mountain Memories for Manx Radio, and he works in a little garage in the little side there by Union Mills, and he introduced himself. And at the same time, would you believe, a person who works for him as well, a fella called Mr. Fox, he was doing some work on the roof of this car, and he said, "You know this fella, do you?" He said, "Who's that then?" He said, "That's the fella that owned Barney the dog." I said, "My God, he must be long gone now. We'll be putting it against a lamppost in the sky a long time ago." He said, he's not with us now, he said. And he said, "Do you know that fella?" And I said, "Well, I know his name is Fox. God, I can't think of his first name off the top of my head." But he said his old man won the Manx Grand Prix in 1953, I think it was. Frank Fox, who lived on the island. So yeah, those types of stories are there. But just going back to Wednesday, Haley, and we're going through again. We might even get the TTea Hall of Fame in at a later stage if I can press the right buttons. But we went back to Wednesday, and you showed a picture there of the bottom of Bray Hill, and there was a crowd on the side. We've just put another couple on there, Crasher White and Ray Am, who are far more in the air than Giacomo Agostini would be. But there's no crowd there. It's a beautiful scene of like Bray Hill from the top to the bottom. But when you put that photograph on and we were commentating on it, talking about the first thing, I think I said, "Oh yeah, there's a flag marshal there and there's another one at the bottom." And then the next day, Joe Boyd comes on, and Joe Boyd's marshaled there, I think, for something like 14 years in Aggo's Leap, as it's known. And unfortunately can't do it now. He did this 14 years and then he's a little bit confined to barracks at the moment, but enjoying all the conversation we had. He said, "Do you know the fella's name? There's Ray Am at Aggo's Leap." So the flag marshal would have probably been on duty just a bit further up than that lamppost. And he said, "Oh, that was Dennis Cannell," he said, "the fella you were talking about." He said he marshalled there for, oh God, all kinds of years. He said he was one of those marshals who got one of those long serving plaques for 52 years of service. And he said he was an uncle to Graham Cannell. He said Graham Cannell was a rider, Manx rider, Grand Prix competitor, did well on the short circuits, did well at the TT. I can't remember his results, but that connection came up straight away. And would you believe, not long after Joe had been on the phone, there was a fella called Mike Kane came on. And when you'd gone and exploded the view like that you've just done there now, showing Ray Am at the bottom of Bray Hill, in the crowd, just by a fellow we all knew, Eddie Arden, in the gateway there, he said, "That's me brother." He said, "Ian the Beard Kane." He said, Mike Kane was a competitor. He's not only rode solos and won round the mountain course and Ballown, but certainly he was a sidecar passenger. And would you believe, him and his good lady, instead of saying to his good lady, "You should be home making me tea," he actually competed round the mountain course with her in the chair, Celine. And another brother of his, the Canes, the famous Canes from Spring Valley, It was Peter Kane, who passengered for a sidecar competitor called Keith Griffin, who got a bit of a mention, I think. It might have been on one of the race nights that we did. And all that came about. And then he said, there's another story to it. And I said, what's that, Mike? When I didn't say, what's that? It was all done through this modern technology. He said, my brother worked for Crosby, Kane and Kinnish, which was a well-known panel beating and spraying shop in Domain Road down by the old nurse's home. And there's a story about that as well, but certainly continuing on our little story. He said, do you know he painted Mike Hailwood's helmets? And I said, no, I didn't know it. And certainly then he hadn't seen it, I don't think, or his brother hadn't seen a photograph, or some prominent member of the family hadn't seen this photograph. 1978, when Mike Hailwood came to the island, returned to the island to ride, he entrusted Crosby, Kane and Kinnish to do his race helmets for the practice week and race week. And he had a lovely photograph, and it's on the site somewhere if your man can troll through it, of them down there at Crosby, Kane and Kinnish's with Mike Hailwood in the centre, in civvies, not in his leathers. And
Wow.
all the fellas who worked at Crosby, Kane and Kinnish's, and Mike Hailwood with these three distinctive, he had a very distinctive crash hat, if you could call it that. And
Fantastic.
certainly there, yeah. So that all kind of came about from a simple photograph. And
Amazing.
then I can add to it, because that when the Flag Marshal Dennis Corkle retired, I think there was a fella called Brian Skillicorn took over. And if any of you have seen the footage of Paul Horrible Orrit crashing on Bray Hill, you'll notice that Flag Marshal, because he travelled such a distance, Paul Orrit, with the bike, he was very nearly up to where that flag marshalling position was. And you'll notice Brian Skillicorn, Chucky, as he was affectionately known, rushing out and virtually standing in front of Paul Orrit to protect him. And that kind of just sums everything up about marshals, whether they're flag marshals, ordinary marshals, the care that they think about in a time where they're putting themselves at risk, because people were still coming down Bray Hill, remember, after him. And it was all resolved, and he didn't have too many injuries. But yeah, so there's 5 minutes gone, just like that.
They are the unsung heroes, aren't they? The stuff they'll see over the years, but the relationships they'll build as well, and the racing they'll get to witness. And there's good times and bad times, but yeah, we could spend hours talking to them. I think we'd definitely love to get them back on, and we've got to get Big H back on as well, haven't we? Sort his tech issues out.
Yeah, he'll tell you the story. They did a little function down at the Manx Legion Club when the Phil Hogg auction went. There was a lady, God, I can't think of her name as well now. Dear me, this memory lapse is a terrible thing. But I know she lives at Round Hay in Quarterbridge Road, which is by Aggo's Leap, and she got John McGuinness over, Big H, and Big H was the star of the night. You know, he is wheelchair bound, and certainly he came down and he just entertained the crowd. Talking about the time he came off, which I couldn't make it. I was away at Bud Jackson's daughter's wedding, and I couldn't make it. But he told a story about when they came to lift him into the helicopter, where the patients go, there wasn't enough room. He couldn't fit them in. So he had to travel in a different way than anybody else has ever traveled in the helicopter. And I think the doctor finished up giving him his seat, and the doctor traveled where the stretcher would have been laid horizontal on the ground. Well, on the helicopter as well, like, you know. Yeah. Kipper Killip is another one with the old helicopter. And the boys are coming in a bit confused, and Kipper was there directing operations, and the fella kind of came round after being knocked unconscious, and he says, where am I? He says, don't panic, son. He said, we're just taking you up to heaven. He said, you'll be gone in a minute. So that type of humour that Kipper's got, like, and he knew full well he wasn't too badly injured.
Oh, I have a question here for you from Philip Fireblade Phil Nelms. He's got, could you ask Roy, has he ever been asked to go in the pit lane for a rider? That's a great question.
I did it once. situation cropped up. We weren't involved. We were only doing Grand Prix. It was for Bob Jackson. The situation was that I think it would probably be after his dad had died, so none of the brothers were available. But Bud would be racing, and Tom might have not have been on the island, or whatever the case may be. And he said, "Hey, I got nobody for pit like." And he said, "Will you and Paul do it?" That was Paul Lambert, who was the son of Lambert Racing. God, I can't think of his name either, but Paul Lambert was definitely the one. I said, "Well, I'll have a go at it, like, but don't expect too much." And he said, "Oh, it's only putting fuel in, like, because it's production race." So we went in, and I didn't go on the fuel. I was the visor man, rubbing the visor, rub the number plate. And there was only two of us. It was kind of low-key effort. He'd got a 4-cylinder Yamaha, and I think he was running about 10th or 11th, as he would. Competitive Bob all the time, but not. It was in between his kind of, before he got offered the McAdoo Kawasaki and stuff like that. And he came in, and the first thing was that Paul got the nozzle in. Then we went to the visor, and I wasn't familiar with the system, but he wasn't taking anything off. That's just that when it was going, that the side of the helmet, the connection there, kind of detached itself. And I thought it was a simple case of pressing the stud back in. But when you're under pressure, pushing a stud into a certain location is not the easiest thing in the world. And it just wouldn't go. And when Paul removed the pipe, you'll see the boys when they're on the DVDs doing pit stops, they've got a rag, and they immediately put the rag underneath. I mean, there's been some dramas with hot fuel going on to engines and, different things, but he didn't do that. So when he pulled the nozzle out, there was a residue, even though he'd shut it off, in between the stop and the end of the nozzle. And that splashed onto the pit lane. And I can remember Doreen Jackson, Bill Jackson's wife, screaming and shouting at us how incompetent we were. And we were. We finished up. Bob set off with a piece of duct tape holding his visor on, and various things. It's like that story about last night about Davy Todd, when his visor was faulty and he had that gap in the side. And I felt terrible about it, and I said, "No, that's not for me. That'll be never happening again." And yet you get professional pit stop crews, like my nephew Brian from Germany comes over every year, comes back to his homeland and gets involved with Stephen Oates or Pence team, and he knows exactly what he's got to do. Changing a wheel, if I can't fix a visor, how on earth would you be putting circlips in and rehanging chains? They're professional men, just like Formula One, really, and they've only got one chance. You can't rehearse. You can rehearse it, but when it comes to the race, you've only got one chance to get everything right, and away you go. So yes, I have been in the pit. Never ever again will I do that. And never ever again will I push a bike through scrutineering. You think you're doing a favor, while the rider goes off, gets his leathers on, push the bike through scrutineering. But if they find a fault and you're not mechanically minded, you've got to push it then out into I think there's a name on it, in a little area where you've got to rectify the fault, and then you can allow the scrutineer will come out, check it that you've done it, and then he'll let you go then into the main holding area for the practice. So never again pit stop crew. I'm quite happy to put my life on the line, so to speak, verbally, but not anywhere near a pit or scrutineering.
Great. And we've got one quick question before we move on to the next pick. What's your top TT memory, Roy, from David McClements?
Yeah, well, when you've got so many, I suppose, it's just tough. Yeah, that is a tough one like that, I suppose. Yeah, memory. If you've still got your memory, which is always a good thing, I suppose you'd have to go back. I always relate to the very first thing that I can think about when we mentioned about getting dragged around with Jack Cannell and Jeff and stuff like that. I always recall the time we were, it would have to be 52 or 53. again with the books, you would get that sort. There's Hammer Films just ringing up now to sort me out. It was 52 or 53 when we were doing it, and I got dragged over, and it was Jeff Duke and Roy and Reg Armstrong going through the pits on Galeras, not with megaphones, but with straight through pipes. And Uncle Jack was commentating as he did on everything like, and he heard them coming from Governor's Bridge. And he said, "Brace your ears, son." He said, "You're going to be drowned in noise shortly." He said, "Duke is showing Armstrong round." And the next thing, these two Galeras came down Glencrutchy Road. We were underneath the old grandstand, so we were right at ear level, if you can call it that. And they went past the pits. And I always say, I could just shut my eyes, and I can hear that sound in my head now. That sound of those 8 cylinders of absolute piercing sound, and they set off down Bray Hill. And I'd heard them a lot more after that, because we were then, when we were watching races, we were dumped in or positioned or manhandled or handcuffed to Hotchkiss's nursery. And they went past there on full noise, like missing the Australian holly bush and then peeling it off into the top of St. Ninian's. So, yeah, that would be your first memory is always your best, I suppose, isn't it? In many aspects of life. And yeah, I'd probably have to say that one's still up there at the top.
Incredible. Great. All right. Shall we get back to the pics?
Aye.
This one looks, tell us all about it.
It's sad, really. It's a very sad picture. I know the man in the middle is Steve Hislop's brother, Gary Hislop. And unfortunately, he lost his life in a kind of a bit of a collision. It was at let's see, was it Silloth? I think just an ordinary type of race meeting. But he'd come over and won the Manx Grand Prix. I think it was newcomers at the time, or they might have been the 3 winners. I think that the thing, just at the top it tells you newcomers winners. That's right. Brian Lund, he was part of a family. Bernie Lund, his dad, he had a G50 matchless, and he came to the island and set up a motorcycling business in Ramsey and selling push bikes and everything like that. And Brian was a good lad. He was a flyer, but I think something happened to him as well. There is a video footage of him having a bit of an off coming into Glen Helen, but I don't think that finished his career. That was just something that he recovered from that. But then riding down the Southern 100, I think he was involved in another incident, and there was tragic circumstances to that as well. And I think he just backed away from the sport. Yeah, Gary Hislop, he would have been a top man. You can see the likeness to Steve in that photograph, really, can't you? In there. And
yeah, absolutely.
And on the right hand side was Ian Ogden, who won the Senior Manx Grand Prix after being the senior newcomer. And tragically, he lost his life at the end of Cronkavody, which is now Molyneux's, right on the apex of the bend there on the left-hand side. One early morning practice. But they were talking, it's ironic, you picked that one out. The man in the black between Brian Lund and Gary Hislop is actually the man I was just been talking about, my nephew, Brian. If he turned round, we could see his face, but I don't think we're going to do that. But yeah, that's the old Park Ferme with the cream railings, which are always associated with that. Sad. But then again, you've got to be realistic about the TT, and we always make a note, and I have made a note here of different things. So it might be an opportune time. Those who've kind of left us since we went off air at the end of Manx Grand Prix week, and immediately it was Wilson Craig died on the September the 4th, and he'd sponsored all kinds of people, like with his bikes, Guy Martin, Cameron Donald, Keith Moore, William Dunlop, Jamie Hamilton, Derek McGee, and David Johnson. Would you believe the one? Davo. And we kind of make a little note, and we don't do it as we do it now, but certainly we do it at certain times where you just drop the name in. And we have had a lovely response by saying how nice of it was you to, it's all big news at the time, but then people forget from like September to when you fire up again at Balown or in the TT. And Percy Tate and Dick Hawes, they were a couple of characters, and Percy Tate especially he was a triumph tester, and he did everything, but he was a real character. And you write it down, and all this history of the triumphs was all related, Slippery Sam. And then, as I say, months later, you're quickly forgotten, no matter whether it's in normal life or in racing. So Percy just died of natural causes. And then we had another name that we went down to get to was Jeff Atkinson, who was a passenger for Mac Hobson in his early days with the BSA. And then Chris Carter, who was he did commentary on the TT and various other things. And then a TT winner, Ken Kavanagh. I remember him racing on the Guzzies with the light kind of green fairings and all that. And then you've often, and Davy Todd was talking last night about Ghost Lee and how quick it is through there and how it frightens the life out of him, and how he couldn't understand how he was allowed to sit on a hedge like a foot from where they were peeling off, and how he got the barn as being the door on the gable was the peeling off point and stuff like that. And poor old Harold Lease, who owned that and was just an absolute gem to people, allowed them to come and sit on his land, a market garden, and he looked after them as well. And it's thing there. Colin Seeley was another top man. He built the Seeley frames, and he's no longer with us. And Pete Coney, a sidecar passenger. Tony Rutter. Everybody will remember Tony Rutter, Michael Rutter, father and sons, to have won TT races. He went poorly in the end and is no longer with us. Warwick Newman, Alan Birch, and Billy McCosh was an Irish rider who was a real steady campaigner. He was never going to win, I would suggest, but by gum, he was always up there, immaculate prepared for bikes. And then the very latest one was Carlo Ubiali, and he was an Italian rider, and that comes back into the era that we were talking about Jeff Duke and Reg Armstrong, because they were riding from 54 onwards on the Clips course. I think we've already mentioned that we lived on the Clips course. So Ubiali, Baltusberger, Schneider, Knoll, Hillebrand, Oliver, all those names were there. And he had a real battle with fella Torquinio Provini and Carlo Ubiali were the top men. And I just want to kind of mention something to put a record straight, if you can call it that. There is somebody, I believe, on the island who said, "Oh, Carlo Ubiali's died. He's the only man to have won on the Clips course and the mountain course in the same day." So I'd like to dispute that fact, because it wasn't physically possible to do it. Ubiali did win on the mountain course and win on the Clips course. But there is another kind of record that comes to light when you think about that, is that Bill Lomas, who was a good rider as well, steady as a rock, he has actually won in the same week on the Clips course and the TT mountain course. He won the 250 on the MV, I think maybe on whatever day it was that they held it, totally independent from the other days, and then went out and won the 350 TT. So he does hold quite a unique record in that respect, and it'll never be broken, never be beaten, because the Clips course is no longer now, obviously. So that was it. So yeah, that clears another couple of points up.
I've got more questions for you here, Roy.
Oh, lovely.
We've got Michael Pursglove. Do you have a favorite place to spectate? So I think we did.
Yeah, we covered this.
Touched on a little bit the other day. Yeah,
a little bit difficult when you kind of thing. I might be able to do it next year, but at the way things are going, but it's. I think I did say I was a bit nervous about speedy areas, whereas people clamour for the spot where they can see them going the quickest. And yeah, I've stuck my head at Bray Hill, and I've been Quarterbridge, Braddon. I've been in the chapel at Union Mills, and that's all because they're easily accessible. And then going the other way, I've been up to Hilbury and up to Keppel Gate, where you can park on the approach, see them sweeping around the 33rd. We've taken the track from Glenroy up to Windy Corner, which, God, you need a trials bike now to do that. We used to be able to drive up there. And then we've been to the 32nd and the bungalow and stuff like that, and obviously Ramsey Hairpin. I've always felt as though I'd like to go certain places. I don't think it's got the appeal down the west coast, going down to from Ballacran to Ramsey. That's kind of too isolated. We did watch in Kirkmichael Village one night, and that was pretty impressive. Impressive for the noise, the budgie killer. But it was the speed, and Dean Harrison and Connor Cummins, especially on the latest last year's DVDs, hanging the back end out there by the chainsaw place in the center of the village. Unbelievable. But I suppose you're on edge all the time, so yeah, maybe Governor's Bridge will suit me fine.
Yeah. And Carolyn Ferris has asked, have you got a song that most reminds you of the TT?
Yes, there's only one, isn't there? Yeah, that would be about it. We've got all the TT Week #1s, which are always good. And whereas possibly we might get an opportunity, if my technology allows, to play the TT Hall of Fame, maybe as at the end. Every time you hear A Whiter Shade of Pale by Procol Harum, my instant recollection is the bottom of Bray Hill, 1967, production TT, and it was a Saturday night, and for whatever reason, Procol Harum were #1, I think, in TT Week for that year. And the production TT started, and they came down and up. And I couldn't watch them right through to the end, because I think they were doing 6 laps on the production. John Hartle won, and Neil Kelly won the 500. And I think Bill Smith got the better of Tommy Robb on the drag to the line on the Bultacos in the 250. But I went round to Governor's Bridge to that because we couldn't stay much longer than seeing them go through. We saw Tommy and Bill Smith come out of the dip at Governor's Bridge. Then we had to nip to work at the Hawaiian Bar in 1967. We'd spent a season at the Sefton Hotel in '66, watching England win the World Cup. And the TT, we saw a bit of that TT in '66, but it was handy because it was at the end of the season. It was the Seaman strike in '66, and they put all the races, the Grand Prix and the TT, in 4 consecutive weeks in September. So the summer season basically was over. So we had an opportunity to go. I did watch Halewood and Stuart Graham on the Honda 6s at Windy Corner on that occasion, but it was a Sunday afternoon, unheard of. So the Hawaiian Bar wasn't open in the afternoon. But Whiter Shade of Pale, Procol Harum, bottom of Bray Hill, production TT, seen the end of the 250, and then working at the Hawaiian Bar, which was a new concept in entertainment. And there was quite a few well-known TT riders who used to visit as well. It was possibly the attraction of the efficient bar staff, but I think it was more the attraction of the efficient waitresses who seemed to be picked for their kind of, how could you call it, attributes. And they certainly attracted. Yeah, there was a group called the Shades played, and they had a limbo dancer. And then when you talk about self-description, the limbo dancer's name was Stretch Wilcox. And I upset him one night because he wanted big drama when he came on stage. Like, that was his work, he put your occupation down like coronation mug seller and limbo dancer, and he only worked once a night. He came on and went under the bar, and then he buggered off. But I one night put the lights on too quickly, and it broke his concentration, and he nearly failed in the thing. And he came rushing back after to say, we switched those lights on too quickly. I want a word with him. And that's so, yeah. The Hawaiian Bar. We won't talk too much about it because, that was it. It was good times.
And I've got Grant Hollis. He said, morning both. Do you think that Derby Road will be allowed to run again?
Yeah, it's pretty sad, really, isn't it? Even the Andrews Racing Association had a full program. The new Luke Andrews Racing Association had put down that they would like to reinstate the roads. Yeah, it was a lovely little circuit, and it's one of the ones that we haven't got on our list, really. To be fair, for better or worse, when you've got anything less to do, you put down how many winners there's been over the period of the TT, and I've got a figure here, but we'll complete our story about the Derby Road. I would hope to see it go. You know, it was good that Balavaran Straight. You know, I mean, you just set it back against the stop, and then when you came to a board which said turn left on the Derby West, when you turned left, then up over the pillbox, that was a good little part for getting the front wheels in the air. Then a bumpy section down into Derby West left, where you went, you had a bit of a slip road there. That was, well, you had a slip road on the end of the Balavaran as well. And then all the bumpy section which take you down past the nurseries into Killer Lane, and the greenhouses on the right, which they used as the paddock for the first time, and then into the Cronk, and then back onto the start and finish. And I think it was Big H, I think, had the lap record for a while then, and Gordon Pantle put it up a bit quicker as the bikes improved. But I would be delighted if they could. The surface is not the best, and I think after COVID-19, the government are going to be very, very careful where they put their money in it. Maybe the new footbridge will not be there. Maybe the talk of the new grandstand will be shoved to one side, and various other projects as well. So, yeah, but as long as they get Derby track back on the Derby velodrome, autodrome, or whatever they call it down there, as long as they get that, so the boys can, even looking forward to 2021, can get those magic signatures to say, you know, let's get sorted. Jamie Kringle, he's out on a push bike this afternoon, and he'd missed the step from the Grand Prix, but he's the Island Centre champion and down at Derby. And he's riding a push bike around the TT course this afternoon with a well-known cyclist, Anna Christian. So he'll be disappointed that, just like Davy Todd was last night, that there'll be no motorcycle action in 2020.
Great. Scott Kennedy said, what a legend to remember all of these memories. Yes, agreed, Scott, agreed. Should we have another picture?
Yeah,
oh, wow.
That's a new one that's come up. Again, an advantage with our site is that you'll see that's a Sean Hogg. Sean Hogg, who was the brother of Phil Hogg, and for 30 years ran the auction which kept the Rob Vine Fund and the Phil Hogg ambulances running. And they just bought brand new ambulances for 2020, and they weren't needed. But again, being part of the organisation there, they said, well, there's other people who can do with the equipment which is in the ambulances and which is spread around the course. So it was arranged with them to get sorted out, and it all went up to Nobles. So although they're not needed, the Hogg ambulances, Hogman is one. Get they all match the registration.
Yeah.
So Sean has just come across this. Is new to me. I've not seen this, but I wouldn't have a clue on the riders. But somebody will tell us. But that looks very much like a couple of Rotax bikes. Certainly the one nearest to us, the Austrian Rotax. You don't see too many of them about. Solos at the moment. I always thought they would be. I mean, Graham McGregor got a hold of one and absolutely blitzed the lap record. And there's Ruth Randall ran a team of Rotax engined under the banner. And who was the fellow that won on that? He beat Bob Jackson. I can never think of his name. It wasn't Horton. God, dear me, that's one that's let me down. But with our group, we're all signed up that you obey by the rules. And apparently, one of the things that happens this day and age is the fact that people pinch photographs, but we can put them on, or the boys can put them on. And I know Sean has just announced that he's just had somebody put a large collection. That's a lovely photograph too, and at a standing start, the driver pushing, the passenger pushing, and he's just having to look over to see whether he's still there. I would suggest, yeah, there's a passenger still there, because there's numerous stories, isn't there? I mean, numerous stories where the passenger falls out somewhere and the driver just keeps going. And yeah, that's happened a few times. Again, unfortunately, in tragic circumstances. But sometimes the passenger just say, "Yeah, Rayhan, yeah, could well be." The numbers now, what will somebody will be doing, and Barry will probably be on the case. They've got every program. So once they find the year out, all they have to do is to go and put the 17, and they'll find out. Chair's on the right, so it's obviously a German competitor. All the British outfits are on the left-hand side, so it's a German competitor. Probably might have been somebody who's just come over for possible world championship points. When the Galeras were going, when I was talking about 1952 or 3, the man who was riding them then was Jeff Duke and Reg Armstrong. And then they were taken out of circulation in 57, as were a lot of the top Italian teams. They just packed in at the end of 57, Guzzi and Bianchi and all. Well, not Bianchi. Bianchi was born from that, as was the pattern. But you had all these tremendous Italian designers and engineers. In 57, they just pulled the plug on the job. So possibly Honda were looking and saying, well, there's a market for it. So they started to make plans to compete in 59. But there was a period of time where Galeras were put into mothball. And then Jeff Duke, when he retired, this would be 63, he demonstrated one somewhere and felt as though they were still competitive. So he convinced Mr. Galera that, could I form a team? So we got some good riders together. He had John Hartle, Phil Reed and Derek Minter. And Scuderia Duke was born. And Derek Minter was one of the riders obviously chosen. And they were beautiful machines. And they brought them over to the TT in 63. So that's got to be 63, that photograph. I know that for a fact. And there's the kind of assembly area that you would get. Well, I'm just getting a little bit concerned. No, I think it is. Yeah. I'm just thinking about that fence at the back. I don't know. Well, anyway, whatever the reason was, they came over. But I think it was Derek Minter that had an off in practice, or he didn't race, and it was left to Phil Reed and John Hartle to pick up the gauntlet. But MV Augusta didn't pull out. What they did pull out to a certain extent from competition in 57, but they then gave what they call private MVs to various riders. Gary Hocking was one, and Mike Halewood. And unfortunately, Mike Halewood was at the peak of his form in 63. John Hartle gave him a good battle. They did all right, but certainly it was Mike Halewood who beat John Hartle. Phil Reed, I think he might have got third on that. But they went on to the World Championship rounds and everything like that. But it was only a 1-year experiment. Jeff Duke was living on the island at that particular time. He was running the Aragon Hotel out in Santon, and that's where all the club dinners were held. But he was the main man behind it, Scuderia Duke. And there's some lovely photographs, but the sound, I can hear that bike now.
Fab. I have got a couple of great questions here for you, Roy. I'll just touch on them before we move on to the final pick. Beer related. Did you manage to go and have a beer with Derry on Sunday? That's the first one.
No, it's the old story. I thought it's like a sober man walking into a room of drunkards, and I thought, no, it's not going to work. By the time I get to the state they're in, they'll have gone home. So I thought, no, I'm not bothered. So we didn't do it, unfortunately. But I would imagine there would be high jinks at Balakid. Maybe we could make a program of it for next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And Michael Pursglove has added any tales of alcohol-fueled hijinks at the end of TT parties, who's the worst behaved? There's a little bit of scoop there you could reveal.
There's a few. Well, you only hear about them, don't you? I mean, there's after the presentations at the Manx Grand Prix, there's some good stories, like going back to the digs, as they call them. Wasn't it? Everybody had digs, and I didn't know what digs meant. I thought it was like getting a shovel and digging a hole. But they always referred to back to the digs. Dudley House has got a few stories that could relate of success going back to there and what have you. And it's hard to imagine. I mean, you can go out and have a drink at 3:00 in the morning now, can't you? Back to, no pubs open on a Sunday. You think back to last orders 10:00, and then you had a special concession come in that you were allowed to drink to 11. And then, if you organised a dance at the Villiers for a sports club and had a genuine excuse, you might get away with 12:00, but it was strict. You couldn't do it. Now you don't have to go out at 7:00 at night to get well oiled before that. You can go out and get a drink at 3:00 in the morning. So you've got to be realistic that everything that you have now was not what you had in the past. And it was all relevant. So going to the presentation, which was probably fired about 8:00, the bars at the Villa Marina or Summerland, wherever they held it, Palace Hotel originally, the old Lido in the centre of Douglas there, the big massive ballroom. There's been terrific thing. We always tell the story that our first presentation I ever went to, I was so disappointed with it, with the way things were, because I thought the riders went up on stage in their leathers, and they didn't. But, well, I suppose I couldn't be too disappointed. I was 23 at the time. But it's just one of those things that you associate, that last orders 12:00. It was always back to after hours in a boarding house. And the police were different in those days. They knew it was going on, but they didn't suddenly dive into anywhere where they knew was that. It was TT week, and the tolerance of the police, as Derry Kissack mentioned the other day, was such that TT week, let everybody crack on. You're going to have a lovely conversation with Martin Bushweiler at dinner time. And then it's the first time in my life, I think, I used to do a bit of DJing in my earlier days, here, there, and everywhere. But I'm the warm-up man for Carl Cox.
Yeah, you are.
Can you say that? I'll put that on my CV.
Brilliant. Roy, I wonder whether you would have known my nan and granddad's hotel on the promenade, because my granddad used to get some characters in there. Rydal Mount Hotel. It's now Chester House.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Taxi drivers. My brother, my mum, my dad was a taxi driver and a coach owner, single coach. And then when my brother came back from the army, there was no work, and he was a top of the range qualified plasterer. So in the summer, he had to go driving coaches. And the thing was, on TT week, they'd all pick passengers up off the boat and do a lap. No two-way then. It was all one way. And you never heard hardly of any accidents. I don't know what it was, but people just seemed to be more kind of, forgiving to everybody else. They didn't want to be, TT riders and single way and all that. But every taxi driver on the island could go from the Villiers to right through to Paramount City or the Crescent and tell you every boarding house that there was on the frontage. The Belvedere, the Jacksons, the Athol, and then the old classic story about the fella jumping into the cab from a boat and saying, "Where you want to go to?" He said, "The R10." He said, "The what?" He said, "The R10. I'm stopping at the R10." And he thought for a bit. He said, "Oh, the Rio." He said, "Yeah, that's it." He said, "R10. Oh, yeah, the R10. Yeah, that's a taxi driver story, isn't it?" Yeah, but they were all legends. And then up in Hutchinson Square and everywhere around there, Norman Dunn has been a contributor on our page, and the stories about Norman, an Irish rider, and come to live in the Isle of Man, and it's just legend stuff. And Joey was there, and then the Saddle, where they got all the journalists get their stories from these little pubs where you fit, the market in Douglas. They don't go to the big places. They seem to think now that you just want a big pub and get lots of people in and make lots of money, but they destroy the atmosphere with bloody petrol cans up in the roof and stuff like that, gathering dust, and nobody's bothered. You can't beat the atmosphere of the Rover's Return and
it's great.
places like that. You'll know that, being a girl about town in your younger days.
My younger days. I love going back. Whenever I go back, I always book in a date with my granddad to have a pint of Bushies. And we'll go around the Rovers and we'll go to the market and the Albert. It's great. I love
Fabulous.
it.
That's it.
It's
like Cheers bar, isn't it? Like Cheers, where everybody knows your name.
Yeah, for sure. I've got a little question here from Kathy Martin Roy. It's a great one. Her daily TT fetish is having a Davison's Whippy ice cream. How good is a Davison's Whippy ice cream? What is your TT fetish, Roy, and why?
Davison's Whippy ice cream's not very good for a type 2 diabetic. But even at the diabetic version, I mean, dear me, it's like a diabetic anything, isn't it? It takes all the excitement and enjoyment out of it. But I have been known to partake, and it's one thing that I have missed, being based where I am. And it's only, it might seem a strange thing to say, and it's not being big-headed or anything like that, but I haven't been as well known as everybody else. Everybody knows Chris Kinley. Everybody knows Tim Glover, because they're part and parcel of the paddock. Everybody knows Chris Palmer from his riding days. So you can't get away with anything. I, for a long time when I was just doing Grand Prix, could wander around and nobody knew who you were. So I could have a Davidson's ice cream and wander around and stick my head in a tent, and people would be yapping away and they wouldn't clam up. When it was just somebody, who's that nosy bugger that's in the thing. So I got some information. The classic one was Bill Swallow. We were due to go, I think, down to Ramsey or somewhere to do the commentary, and I'd just wandering around getting the updates on for the day's work. And Bill Swallow arrived in his van into the paddock, just happened to be there, and got out through the doors open, and there was a fella he knew very well, a couple of vans away, and he said, "Oh, Bill, how you doing?" I said, "Oh, yeah, fine." He said, "What a night I've had." He said, "I was just getting the bike ready. Everything was spot on." He said, "And the petrol tank started leaking." And he said, "I had a panic. What the panic I've had on getting all this there." And I'm just earwigging about it all. I don't know whether somebody told him, but when he went past, because he can't hear it, I just relayed the information. I said, and Bill Swallow had a bit of trouble, getting the petrol tank welded and all that. In the old days, you had to go down to the gasworks to get them steamed out. But I have been reliably informed now that if you stick them over a car exhaust, that takes all the possibility of an explosion when you come to weld it up. So stories like that. And I dived into a conversation once with Michael Dunlop, Guy Martin, and not William Dunlop. Oh, dear me. Yeah, the Dunlop family, were talking about a problem they had with a bike. And I was just stood there like a load of other people. And Guy Martin said, "I can fix that." He said, "I've got one there in my garage." He said, "I've told Yamaha all the time what they're doing." But he said, "All they do is turn around and say, 'We're Yamaha, we know what we're doing.'" He said, "I'll cure that for you." And he got on his mountain bike and he shot off. And there was a load of Irish fellas hanging around. And he said, "What a breath of fresh air that man is." And he was an absolute gem in his early days. And he still is. He just went a bit, because of the amount of people that were hemming him in. He just went a bit kind of standoffish, if you can call it that. But in his when he first came, remember him walking down from the Southern 100, just going for a shower, and, "Hey boy, how you doing?" and all this. "Oh yeah, good. I all right, like." And all good stuff, and get your pizzas in Hull. And he came back then. He zoomed back on the thing and he said, "Here, put that on." He said, "That will cure it." And I remember the Irish fellas that were hanging around saying, "What a breath of fresh air that man is," to help Michael probably wouldn't challenge him at that time. He was early on the island, but he was just, mechanical. He wanted to cure it, and he didn't want him to be suffering every time he went out for practice with this particular problem, which he knew he could cure. So yeah, it would probably be a thing like that. So yeah, it's just now maybe not with all this blooming stuff now with your face on the screen and all that. They say, "Oh, there's Roy Moore there," and you don't. Yeah, you can still, I can still mix, in with the kind of boys in there and get some information. They'll let me know maybe before others, because they'll know full well that I won't release anything until the race is underway. We got a nod from a fella when Carolyn Sells won. She won anyway. She lapped that quick that she seen everybody off, but she had a tank on to do 4 laps, and that gave her allegedly a bit of an advantage. She didn't need it, but then the information was revealed that Martin Bullock and all the boys had got together and constructed a tank, just the same as I knew full well when Bob Jackson went out with that big tank on the McAdoo Kawasaki, that he was going to do 3 laps and 1 pit stop. And the Honda, well, the Works boys were horrified when they saw he was up amongst them and just going to do 1 stop and take, like 40 seconds off their time that he was on for the win. And it was only pure misfortune. Just I could have done what happened. The cap wouldn't go back on. Poor old Tom Jackson probably remembers that. That'll be for the rest of his life, that the cap wouldn't go back on. And all the time he'd built up, and he was on for the win, and he was only a few seconds away at the end, and Ian Simpson won. But that's another part of TT history, isn't it?
Gorgeous. Right. Excuse me. Just before we finish, I've got one more question for you. We've got Grant Hollis. He said, "Wow, we stayed at the Ryder Mountain Hotel for years, Mrs. James." That's my nan. There you go, Doris James. Brilliant. You would have had a pint with my granddad Chris as well, probably, or 2.
Used to be an advertising slogan on all the hotels were top of the range, weren't they? But there were a few dodgy ones, like, and all that. And then there was another place, you won't remember this, but advertising slogans for locations. And there was a place opened in a well-known street in Douglas, an early stab at an Italian restaurant, I think. And they called themselves, well, I'll not mention the name, but, oh no, we would say it is, the Rio del Grill. It was round whereabouts where road and track motorcycles are now.
Okay, yeah.
And it was good. It was like when the Chinese first, it was different. You could go and get a meal there at any time and have a pint. And their advertising slogan, somebody came up with an advertising slogan for the Rio del Grill. Eat at the Rio del Grill, 5,000 flies, can't be wrong.
Brilliant. All right, Roy. So just before we do have to sadly bring this to an end, I want to ask you, senior race day, do you have a standout memory from over the years that you could, from your senior race day experiences, it might be before commentary or during, that story that really stands out that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, we were sat in Hotchkiss's when they did the 8 lap senior, and Bob McIntyre did the 100. We've discussed whether it was the first 100. That's kind of history as well, isn't it? Yeah, there's been a few. I think, I was at the bottom of Bray Hill again, I think, for Agostini and Halewood in '67. But that was a battle between 2. We just had a few reruns on Manx Radio, and and I don't know. I listened to 1 or 2 laps, but I didn't listen to the lot, because you pick up on your mistakes. And it's like it's surprising sometimes when somebody's on the telly and they'll say, "Oh, I've never watched that," and you think, you've got it on. You'd be watching it every night, beaming, because you were so good, or something like that. And I think they are genuine. You get, and the thing that the one that springs to mind is the Hickman Harrison battle from 2018. 2018. And being so close all the way around, how are you going to be lapping it at 132, 133 mile an hour and be separated there? And, as I say, it was noticeable during the commentary how the difference was between handing over with getting the bungalow or handing over and staying at the bungalow and getting the race result bang up to date with the respective lead men at the grandstand. And that came to light. But yeah, that's something special. Me screaming and shouting like a lunatic when the 3 seconds went to 0.8 of a second.
Yeah.
And then you wouldn't know at the end of the race when you come out of the commentary box who'd won in the morning. You couldn't think back. It's just one of those things that you get involved in, and you get carried away with, really, to be fair. And some people like it, some people don't, but tough.
I love it. Right, Roy, thank you. It's been an absolute honor to be listening to your mountain memories and celebrating our non-TT week, hey, and also our non-senior race day. We've got Will Kearney said, "What a joy! Many, many thanks. Made my day. This, yes, made mine too. Absolutely." So, Roy, I'm going to hand it over to you to close because I believe you've got some special tracks to share with us.
Well, we've got a little thing there. If things go to plan, I've just got to move because we did have the sounds, but just give us a little chance to possibly switch a few things on and off. And well, it sums it up, really, I suppose, isn't it? The way things are working out. There was a chap called David Collister who was on folk singer, and I think we told the story. And we have done a couple of race nights for his grandson to be shown tonight to a select group of people. And if I press that should bring it on. But the local artist Dickie Kelly recorded a song called the TTea Hall of Fame, which were words by David Collister. It sums it up, in my opinion. Abley, just give us a shout when the sound is right.
Okay. Keep going. Up. A little bit higher.
How's that?
Yeah. We could go higher even as well.
Wally Henley and Ray John from Penny Prince and Arnie Bell. Graham, George Miles, John 13, Bob McIntyre.
Perfect, Roy.
You can hear them mighty engines as they run their race to fame. From the pioneers
of yesteryear to the heroes of today.
Made the records, they're the champions of the game. And their days will live forever in the TTea Hall of Fame. Roy Schmidt with Sunbeam Norton, the leader and good sleep. Trish Sheepwick broke the records in the Isle of Man TT. BMW stopped an engine.
I'll hand it over to you, Roy.
Yeah, the manor. Daddy Wood and myself are going to sing it up the manor. From the pioneers of yesteryear to the heroes of today. And then made the records, they're the champions of the game. And their names will live forever in the TTea Hall of Fame. Now there's other names to mention, big names have been at the top. Men like Jeffries and McCallum, and they're all his love. They've all been TTea riders, and they have a claim to fame. But one man stands above them all, and Joey was his name. You could hear that mighty Honda roaring down Bray Hill. Safest man in the TTea cause, he gave us such a thrill. Rode his final TTea race at the age of 48.
Yes, William
and Joseph Dunlop was quite simply great.
Now 10,000 people line the mountain course each year to see the world's great riders who come from far and near. The new rider takes the trophy and we hail another day. That's the glory with the heroes in the TTea Hall of Fame. You can hear them mighty engines as they run their race to fame. From the pioneers of yesteryear to the heroes of today. They're men who made the records, they're the champions of the game. And their names will live forever in the TTea Hall of Fame.